She was 15 years old, standing in the kitchen of a crime lord's mansion, when the boy who would one day rule Seoul's underworld first looked at her like she was the only real thing he had ever seen. 9 years later, she walked back through those same doors, not as a servant's daughter, not as the girl they threw away, but as a billionaire who had built an empire from their cruelty. And he was standing there waiting, but so was everything that had tried to destroy them. If you have ever loved someone the world said you were not allowed to have, stay with me until the very end, hit like, and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The smell of the Han estate hit Naomi Carter before she even stepped through the gate. It was the same smell. 12 years of living, and she had never forgotten it. Polished stone, expensive flowers that nobody ever picked, and underneath all of it, something colder. Something that did not have a name, but lived in the walls of places where powerful people kept their secrets. She stood on the sidewalk outside the iron fence with her rolling carry-on beside her, and her phone buzzing in her coat pocket, and told herself she was not nervous. She had stood in front of Senate hearings. She had closed a $2 billion deal in a glass tower in Singapore while 3 men twice her age tried to talk over her. She was not nervous. Her hands were shaking anyway. Danielle Carter pressed her palm against the small of Naomi's back. "Baby, we don't have to walk through that gate tonight. We can find a hotel. We can find something cheaper than what they offered, and just... We already said yes." Naomi picked up her bag. "We can't afford to say no." Danielle was quiet after that. She was a woman who had learned early in life that silence was safer than argument, and Naomi had spent 15 years watching her mother fold herself smaller and smaller to fit into spaces that were never built for her. The death of Naomi's father, Marcus Carter, had not broken Danielle. It had just finished a job that poverty had already started. He went out one Tuesday morning to fix a transmission on a car that wasn't even his, and came home in a casket, and after that, there was nothing left in Chicago that wanted them. Seoul had been Danielle's idea, technically. The agency that placed domestic workers internationally had come to her through a church contact, and the Han family had specifically requested an experienced English-speaking housekeeper. The salary was a number that made Danielle cry in the bathroom, where she thought Naomi couldn't hear her. The scholarship attached to the arrangement, Mom, a full academic placement at one of Seoul's most prestigious private academies for Naomi, had sealed it. They were not walking into the Han estate. They were surviving their way through its front gate. The main house sat at the end of a long driveway lined with shaped hedges that someone paid serious money to maintain. Lights burned in the upper windows. A man in a dark jacket met them at the entrance and spoke to Danielle in formal Korean, and Danielle answered him in the careful phrases she had spent 3 months learning from a language app while working double shifts. Naomi followed them inside and kept her face still and her chin level and let her eyes take in everything without appearing to look at any of it. The foyer alone was larger than the apartment they had left behind in Chicago. Black marble floors, a staircase that curved upward with the kind of confidence only old money could sustain. Framed photographs on the walls. Official portraits, stiff and formal, the kind people hang to remind visitors of who they are dealing with. Naomi studied one as she passed. A man with steel gray temples and a jaw that looked like it had never in its life produced a smile. Beside him, a woman in an ivory suit, beautiful and immovable as carved stone. Between them, 2 boys in dress clothes. The older one stood straight with his chest out, already performing. The younger one stood slightly apart from the rest of his family, eyes aimed somewhere outside the frame. She moved past it before anyone noticed her looking. Their quarters were on the back end of the second floor, 2 small connected rooms that were clean and adequate and very clearly designed to remind the occupants of their position. Danielle didn't say anything about the size of it. She put their bags down and started unpacking with the focused efficiency of a woman who did not have the luxury of being disappointed. "You start school Monday," she said. "Get your uniforms laid out. Get your books organized." "Mom." "Don't mom me. We didn't come this far so you could spend your first week moping." Naomi looked at the window. Beyond it, the estate's back garden spread out under the night sky. Stone paths lit by low amber lanterns, trees she couldn't identify standing dark and still. It was beautiful in the way that things owned by dangerous people sometimes were, carefully constructed, impossible to touch. "I'm not moping," she said. "I'm just looking." The academy was worse than she expected. which was saying something because she had expected it to be bad. It wasn't the schoolwork. The schoolwork was fine. Naomi had tested into advanced mathematics 2 grade levels above her age back in Chicago, and even in a language she was still building her command of, the equations and the logic held the same shape. Numbers didn't change their character based on which country you were sitting in. She understood that kind of certainty. She liked it. What she did not like was the way 17-year-old daughters of conglomerate heirs looked at a black American girl in a scholarship uniform like she had walked into the building on the wrong side of a door that didn't have her name on it. Nobody was cruel the way people were cruel in American schools, with its loudness and its directness. Here the cruelty was architectural. It was the way a group would shift 2 inches to the right as she approached a table, the way conversation stopped and then resumed at a slightly different frequency, the way her name was mispronounced with total consistency by people who were capable of memorizing hundreds of kanji characters but somehow could not retain a 2-syllable English name. She ate alone for the first 3 weeks and told herself it didn't matter. It mattered. She called her friend Brianna back in Chicago during the 40-minute lunch break she spent sitting on a stone ledge behind the Humanities building, and Brianna said, "Just find one person. You only need one person." And Naomi said, "What if there isn't one?" And Brianna said, "There's always one." And Naomi didn't argue, even though she wasn't sure Brianna was right. She went back to the estate that evening to find her mother had saved her a bowl of kimchi jjigae from the kitchen. Food Danielle had eaten herself for the first time only 2 weeks prior and had already started learning to make because Danielle Carter did not live in a place without making herself useful to it. "How was it?" Danielle asked. "Fine." Danielle looked at her the way mothers look at children who are lying badly. "Fine." "Fine, Mom." Danielle let it sit for a moment and then said, "You know what your father used to say." Naomi sat down and pulled the bowl toward her. "Don't." "He used to say the only opinion that matters about your worth is yours, and the one God gave you at Chi." "Mom, please." Danielle was quiet. She smoothed a dish towel across the counter and looked away. And for a second she looked very tired and very small, and Naomi hated herself for making her look that way. "It'll get better," Naomi said, which was not a truth, but was the thing the situation required. "I know it will," Danielle said, which was also not quite a truth. "Eat your food." What did he do? She met him on a Wednesday in October. She was in the kitchen at 11 at night because she couldn't sleep, and because the kitchen was the one room in the Han estate that felt proportionate to human beings. Everything else in the house was scaled for authority. The kitchen was just a kitchen. It had worn spots on the counter near the stove and a window that let in the smell of the garden and a small wooden table pushed against the far wall that was clearly never used by anyone who lived here in any official capacity. Naomi was at that table with her calculus textbook open and a cup of instant ramen she had smuggled from her room, working through a problem set that was due in 2 days when the door opened. He was wearing a gray sweater and sweatpants, and his hair was doing nothing useful, and he stopped dead in the doorway when he saw her. She looked up at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. She recognized him from the portrait in the foyer, the younger boy, the one who had been looking outside the frame. "I didn't know anyone would be in here," he said in Korean. His voice was lower than she expected. Flat and careful, like a person who had learned to give nothing away before they had to. "I didn't know I wasn't allowed," she answered in Korean. Her accent was still rough around the edges, but she had been drilling it every day for months, and the grammar held. He blinked, like he had not expected her to answer in his language. "You're the housekeeper's daughter." "Naomi Carter." She looked back at her textbook. "You're the heir." A pause. "Kang Min-jae." "I know who you are." He didn't leave. He stood in the doorway for another moment and then crossed to the refrigerator, opened it, stared into it for a long time, with the particular blankness of someone who is not actually hungry but doesn't know what else to do with themselves. He took out a bottle of water he probably didn't want and came and stood near the table. "What are you working on?" he said. "Calculus?" "Which part?" She glanced up. He was looking at the textbook with an expression she couldn't immediately read. Not dismissive, not particularly interested, more like someone who had found an object they thought they remembered but couldn't place. Integration by parts, she said. Why? I have the same unit. I've done it 3 times with a tutor and I still don't understand why it works. Naomi considered him for a moment. The heir to the Han family's empire was standing in his family's kitchen at 11 o'clock at night in gray sweatpants, unable to do his calculus homework. She didn't find it funny exactly, but it loosened something in her chest that had been wound tight since the gate. Sit down, she said. I'll show you. He sat. It was not an instant friendship. It wasn't that clean. He was guarded in the way of people who had been given every material thing and almost no trust. And she was guarded in the way of people who had been given almost nothing and had learned to protect what little they had. They were cautious around each other for weeks before either of them dropped enough of their respective armor to have an actual conversation. But the Tuesday and Wednesday night kitchen sessions continued. She didn't invite him, and he didn't ask permission. He just started appearing. She learned things about him in pieces. That he had been in tutoring for the same subject since middle school, not because he lacked intelligence, but because no tutor would tell the Han heir directly that he was approaching problems the wrong way, that he photographed things when he thought no one was watching. She caught him once with his phone raised toward the light coming through the kitchen window, absolutely still, the way people are still when they care about something and don't want to disturb it. That he had an older brother who frightened him in a way he would not acknowledge directly, but that lived in the way he tensed when he heard footsteps in the upstairs hall. She did not ask about the family business. That felt like walking into a room she hadn't been given a key to. He asked her once, directly, what she wanted. They had been talking about her school. She had mentioned, without meaning to, the lunch periods alone, and something in his face had shifted. Not pity exactly, something quieter and more specific than pity. He asked what she did during those periods, and she said she went over her assignments, and he said why. And she said because she was going to get into MIT on a scholarship and become a software engineer and build technology that actually helped people who got forgotten by systems designed to ignore them. She said it the way people say things they have repeated privately so many times that the words have become structural, part of the architecture of who they are, rather than a goal they are still reaching for. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you actually know what you want, don't you? He looked down at the table. What I want and what I'm going to do are 2 different conversations. What do you want? He picked up her pencil off the table and turned it over in his hands. To take photographs somewhere no one knows my name. Tokyo. Maybe Iceland. I read about this place in Iceland once where the sky does things at night. He stopped, put the pencil down. It doesn't matter? It matters, she said. He looked at her then. Really looked, the way he looked at the light in the window, like she was something he was trying to understand the shape of before it disappeared. You're the only person who has ever said that to me, he said, in this house. She didn't say anything back. She wasn't sure there was anything to say. She just looked at him and didn't look away. And the kitchen was very quiet, and outside the garden was dark. And that was the moment she felt something shift between them, like tectonic plates making a small, quiet adjustment that would eventually change the shape of everything above them. October became November. November became December. The calculus sessions became conversations about everything, Korean history and American politics, and whether love was an emotion or a decision. She made him explain organized crime to her the way a teacher explains something, because she thought the act of explaining it honestly might tell her more than asking him directly. He did it with his eyes on the table and his voice level and absolutely no defensiveness, which she had not expected. He explained it like it was weather, like it was a system he had been born inside and could describe with precision, but had never consented to. Does it bother you? She asked. What your family does. Yes. Then why? Because bothering doesn't change the architecture of the building you're standing in. He looked at her. You know that. You know exactly what that feels like. She did. She hated that he was right. He gave her the bracelet on a Tuesday in early December, 3 days before winter break. He put it on the kitchen table without ceremony, no gift wrap, no explanation, just set it down near her textbook and sat down across from her. She looked at it. It was handmade, leather cord and small metal charms that, when she looked closely, were not the decorative shapes she had expected. They were symbols, a circuit board, a binary notation, a small stylized antenna. Things she had described to him in the context of her future, her actual plans, the work she intended to do. He had been listening to every word for 2 months, and then he had made this. You didn't have to. I know, he said. She put it on. It fit. She looked at it on her wrist and felt something dangerous move through her chest, something she recognized and had been carefully not naming for several weeks. Minjae. Don't, he said quietly. I know. I was going to say thank you. He exhaled. Some of the tension in his jaw released. Thank you, then, for the calculus. For the calculus? She almost laughed. Almost. They sat like that for a while, both of them knowing something had changed and neither of them willing to say it out loud yet, because to say it out loud would be to bring it into a house where the wrong person hearing it would end everything before it had a proper name. Sit. They went to the garden the night before winter break, in defiance of every reasonable instinct either of them possessed. It was cold. The garden was empty, and the amber path lights made the stone walkways look like something out of a scene from a different century. And Minjae had brought a blanket from somewhere, and they sat on a bench near the old plum tree at the back corner where the cameras did not quite reach. She had noticed him checking this, confirming it, and the carefulness of that act made her both grateful and quietly afraid. He told her about his grandmother that night. She had been the only person in the Han family who had spoken to him like a person rather than an heir. She had given him a jade pendant when he was 12, the one she wore during her whole life, handed down from her mother, passed along because she said she wanted him to give it to someone when he found someone worth giving it to. He reached into his jacket pocket and took it out. It sat in his palm, pale green, carved into the shape of a small plum blossom because his grandmother had loved them. Minjae. Her voice came out different than she intended, lower, less defended. I know what I'm doing, he said. Do you? No, he said honestly, but I know that it's you. I've known for a while that it's you, and I keep trying to make it into something else, and it isn't something else. The cold moved around them both. I know what my family would do, he said. I know exactly what they would do. I'm telling you anyway. He looked at her with the same steadiness she had watched him use to explain terrible things in a level voice. I love you, Naomi Carter. I don't know what to do with it yet, but I know it's real. She thought about her mother 2 floors above them, asleep, exhausted from carrying a life that had been broken and reassembled too many times. She thought about the scholarship and the apartment they couldn't afford to go back to, and the number of things that stood between this garden and anything that could be called a future. And then she thought, the number of things you refuse to feel because feeling them is inconvenient is exactly the number of times you will lie awake at 45 wishing you had been braver at 15. I love you too, she said. He closed her hand around the jade pendant. His fingers were cold and she could feel his pulse in them. One day, he said, I'm going to have enough power in this family that I can choose my own life. When that day comes, don't make me a promise you might not be able to keep. I'm going to keep it. She looked at him, at the heir who didn't want to be an heir, at the boy who photographed light through windows and dreamed of Iceland and had spent 2 months memorizing every word she said about her future and turned it into something she could wear on her wrist. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They sat in the garden until the cold became too much to argue with, and neither of them knew that above them, on the second-floor balcony, a shadow had been standing in the dark for 20 minutes. Watching. And when it moved back inside, it moved with the particular unhurried confidence of someone who has just found exactly the weapon they were looking for. The shadow belonged to Han Seong-woo. Minji's older brother was 22 years old and had been performing the role of devoted Han heir since before he could properly read, and he was very good at it. He was the kind of good at things that came not from talent, but from the specific hunger of a person who understood early that everything they wanted had already been designated for someone else. Song-woo had watched his younger brother receive their father's attention, their father's investment, their father's cold and particular form of pride. and he had learned to smile at family dinners while building in the private architecture of himself, something that did not smile at all. He did not go to their parents immediately. That was not how Seong-woo operated. He was patient the way a man is patient when he has learned that timing is a weapon and that weapons deployed too early are weapons wasted. He went to his room and sat in his chair and thought about what he had seen in the garden, and then he spent the next 3 weeks making sure he had seen enough. The cameras in the garden did not reach the plum tree bench. Seong-woo knew this because he had reviewed the estate's security layout the previous year under the pretense of updating it. He also knew that the kitchen had one camera above the back entrance that captured the door and the first 8 feet of floor and nothing else. Not the wooden table at the far wall, not the chairs around it, not 2 teenagers sitting close enough that their elbows were almost touching over a calculus textbook. He did not need cameras. He had his own eyes, and he had time, and he used both. He watched the way Min-jae moved through the house in December, the slight change in how he carried himself, still controlled, still armored in the Han family manner, but with something underneath it that hadn't been there in October. Something lighter and more dangerous at the same time. The way a wire gets when voltage runs through it. Seong-woo had seen Min-jae survive years of their father's pressure without that quality. Whatever the American girl had done to him in that kitchen had done it faster than anything else in Min-jae's life. He started recording on December 14th. He used a device small enough to hide in the hedge near the plum tree, repositioned twice over a week, and captured 40 minutes of audio from 2 separate evenings that he then listened to in his car with the engine off and the garage door closed. He listened with his eyes on the steering wheel and his face doing nothing. When it was done, he sat quietly for a moment, and then he went inside and called his father's personal secretary and scheduled a family meeting for the following Sunday. Mamdam. Naomi did not know any of this. She came back from winter break to a Seoul that was colder than she had left it, the kind of cold that came off the Han River and got inside your coat seams and stayed there. She came back to the academy and to the stone ledge behind the humanities building and to lunches eaten alone, except that in January, one of the girls in her mathematics course, a small, quiet girl named Park Ji-hee, who wore her uniform with the sleeves too long and always sat in the second row, asked Naomi to check her work on a practice exam, and Naomi said yes, and they sat together for 30 minutes with their papers side by side, and at the end of it Ji-hee said, in careful English, "You are very smart." And Naomi said in Korean, "So are you." And Ji-hee looked at her with the expression of someone who had not been expecting a person to speak directly to them, and that was the beginning of the one person Brianna had told her would exist. It helped. Not everything, but enough. What helped more was Tuesday and Wednesday nights. What helped more was the kitchen and the wooden table and Min-jae sitting across from her with his textbook open and his phone face down and his whole attention pointed in her direction. She had never had someone's whole attention before. Her father had loved her, but he had always been fighting something. Debt, exhaustion, the particular despair of a man working himself apart trying to hold a family together. Her mother's attention was present but practical, aimed always at the next problem to be managed. Min-jae just listened. He asked questions that meant he had been paying attention the last time she spoke. He remembered things she said once and referenced them weeks later in ways that made her feel like she existed continuously, not just in the moments when she was directly in front of someone. She had never told anyone about the part of her that was afraid she would fail. She told him in January, sitting at the table with the heater running and her ramen going cold because she kept forgetting to eat it. She told him she was afraid that she was not actually as smart as her test scores suggested, and that one day she would hit a wall and find out that everything she had built her future on was just a story she had told herself about herself, and that the real story was smaller and sadder and had no MIT in it. He was quiet for a moment. "Do you actually believe that?" "Sometimes, not always, but enough." "That's the most honest thing I've heard in this house in 17 years, he said. "That's bleak." "Yes." He picked up his pencil. "You're going to MIT, Naomi." "You don't know that. I know you solve problems for 17 minutes and then recheck your work for 40 because you don't trust the answer the first time. And I know that every time you recheck it, it's right." He looked at her. "I know what careful looks like. You're the most careful person I have ever watched do anything. That's not luck. That's not a story you made up. That's you." She looked at the table because she didn't trust her face right then. Stop, she said. I'm serious. I know you are. That's why I need you to stop for a second. He stopped. He gave her the second. That was another thing about him. He knew when to go quiet. Most people didn't. Most people filled silences with more talking because silence made them uncomfortable. Min-jae sat with silence the way he sat with difficult equations, waiting for the shape of it to clarify. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers for about 3 seconds. Then she took her hand back and picked up her pencil and looked at her textbook. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me for telling you something true, he said. They went back to work. Outside the kitchen window, the garden was dark and cold, and the plum tree stood without its blossoms, and neither of them noticed the tiny device lodged in the hedge 14 meters away, or the fact that this conversation, like 2 before it, was being captured with extraordinary clarity. The Sunday meeting happened on January 19th. Naomi and Danielle were not in the house for it. They had been given the afternoon off. Danielle had been told the family required privacy for a business discussion, which was unusual but not unprecedented. They took the subway into Insadong and walked around the market stalls, and Danielle bought a small ceramic pot for her room, and Naomi bought a second-hand English-Korean dictionary because she was determined to stop using the translation app as a crutch. They ate tteokbokki from a street stall, and Danielle said, "Are you happy here?" with the kind of directness she reserved for moments when she had been worrying about something long enough that it needed to come out. Naomi thought about it honestly. "I'm more than I was," she said. Danielle looked at her. "That's not the same thing as happy." "No, but it's something." Danielle wrapped both hands around her paper cup. "You've been different since December. Something shifted." She looked at Naomi sideways. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Naomi kept her eyes on the street. "I like it here more than I expected to." "Naomi." "Mom." Danielle's jaw moved. She was deciding something, then, "There's a look you get. Since we came back from break, you look like a person who has somewhere they want to be." The accuracy of it hit Naomi somewhere behind her sternum. She kept her face level. "I'm just more comfortable. It takes time." Danielle watched her for another moment and then looked away. She didn't push. Danielle Carter had survived too much to spend her energy fighting battles before they reached her. But the worry didn't leave her face. It settled in the lines around her eyes and stayed there, quiet and patient, like something waiting for the moment it would be proven right. Back at the estate, the meeting had not gone well, or rather it had gone exactly as Seong-woo intended, which for everyone else in the room amounted to the same thing. Minji found out what had happened from the expression on the housekeeper Mrs. O's face when he came through the kitchen that evening, a particular tightening around the eyes that meant something had occurred that she was not going to speak about and that he should be careful. He went upstairs to his room and sat on his bed and waited. Seong-woo came in 40 minutes later without knocking. He never knocked. Minji's room was the only space in the estate that was supposed to be his own, and Seong-woo violated it routinely as a structural demonstration of how ownership worked in this house. "Sit down," Seong-woo said, which was funny because Min-jae was already sitting, but what he meant was pay attention, stop pretending you have somewhere else to be. Min-jae looked at him. "What did you do?" Seong-woo sat down in the desk chair and crossed one knee over the other with the ease of a man entirely comfortable with the room he is in. He was handsome in the Han way. Strong jaw, deliberate posture, everything calibrated to communicate authority. He looked at his younger brother with an expression that was almost gentle, the way certain animals look gentle right before they do something precise and terminal. "I told them about your housekeeper problem," he said. The blood in Minji's body did something cold and specific. "She's not a problem." "She is now." Seong-woo reached into his jacket and set a small recording device on the desk. He did not press play, he just let it sit there. "I have been thorough, Min-jae. I want you to understand that. Whatever version of this you're telling yourself, that it's private, that no one knows the real nature of it, that you have been careful. Discard that version." Min-jae looked at the device. His breathing was completely steady. That was the Han training. Show nothing. Feel everything where no one can see it. He had mastered this completely, and right now he despised himself for it because what he needed his body to do was stand up and break the thing on the desk into pieces, and instead he was sitting still with his hands in his lap. You recorded us, he said. I documented a significant liability to this family's interests. There's a difference. There is no difference. Father would disagree. Seong-woo picked up the device and put it back in his jacket. He already does, actually. We spent this afternoon having a very productive conversation. Mother as well. He tilted his head. They want this resolved before the Choi Alliance negotiations begin. You understand what that means. Min-jae understood exactly what it meant. The Choi Alliance was the centerpiece of the Han organization's political future, a marriage arrangement between the two most powerful families in Seoul's underground, designed to consolidate territory and end a border war that had been costing both sides for 18 months. His father had been constructing it for 2 years. The Han heir's behavior and reputation were, in this context, not personal matters. They were contractual variables. She has nothing to do with the Choi negotiations, Min-jae said. She has everything to do with them. A Han heir with a secret relationship with an American servant's daughter is not a stable political commodity. You know how this works. Seong-woo stood. Father wants a conversation with you tomorrow morning. I'd recommend you go into that conversation without illusions about what the outcome is going to be. He went to the door. Min-jae watched him move, tracking the unhurried quality of it, the certainty of a man who has already won the engagement before the other party knows it has started. Why? Min-jae said. Seong-woo paused at the door without turning around. Why what? You know why I'm asking. A moment. Then Seong-woo turned just enough to present his profile. Because you were chosen, and I was not. Because they look at you, and they see the future of this family, and they look at me, and they see competence. Because you have spent 17 years not wanting the thing I have wanted my entire life, and you have never understood what that feels like. He opened the door. This is not personal, Min-jae. This is just what things cost. He left. Min-jae sat in the room that was supposed to be his and pressed both hands flat against the bed and breathed through his nose for a long time until the thing in his chest stopped feeling like it was going to destroy the walls he had built around it. Then he got up, because sitting was not something he could do anymore, and went out into the hall and down the stairs and into the kitchen where the light was on, and Naomi was at the wooden table with her calculus book open, waiting for a Tuesday night that was about to become something it was never supposed to be. She looked up when he came in. Whatever she saw in his face made her go very still. What happened? She said. It was not a question. He sat down across from her. He put his hands on the table. My brother knows, he said. The kitchen went quiet enough to hear the heating unit cycling on in the wall. Naomi did not move. She sat with her pencil in her hand and her textbook open to a problem set that no longer mattered, and she looked at him with the expression of a person who has been braced for something and has just received confirmation that the bracing was correct. How much? She said. Enough. His jaw moved. He told my parents today. There's a meeting tomorrow. What does that mean? A meeting means what exactly in terms of, it means my father is going to give me a choice that isn't a choice. He looked at her directly. His eyes were the same as always, controlled, careful, watching for the shape of things. But underneath the control was something exposed, something raw and insufficient, like a wall with its facing stripped away to show what it's actually built of. Naomi, I need you to hear me before anything else happens. What I said in the garden was real. That has not changed because of what my brother did. I need you to know that. I know that, she said. Okay. He exhaled. Okay. What are you going to do? He looked at the table. I don't know yet. I know what I want to do. I know what I'm going to be told to do. There's a distance between those two things right now that I don't know how to close. Because you don't have the power yet. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. Naomi set her pencil down. She looked at the bracelet on her wrist, the circuit board charm, the binary notation, all the pieces of her future that he had listened to carefully and made into something physical. She thought about her mother asleep 2 floors above them, exhausted, trusting that the arrangement they had come here for would hold. If they make it a problem for my mother, she said, if they make it a problem for her job, for her salary, for any of it, I will not let them. Min-jae! Her voice came out harder than she intended. harder than she knew she had in her. You just told me you don't have the power yet, so do not tell me what you will and will not let them do. I need you to be honest with me right now more than I need you to protect me." He took the hit of that. She watched him take it, the slight contraction around his eyes, the breath held for a second longer than normal. He did not defend himself. That was still one of the things about him that got inside her defenses regardless of what else was happening. "You're right," he said. "I know I am." She looked at the table. "I need to think." "So do I." They sat in the kitchen that had been the safest room in a house that was not safe, and the warmth of the heater moved around them, and outside the garden was dark, and the plum tree stood without anyone watching it for once, and both of them understood without saying it that the version of this thing they had been living, secret and careful and contained inside Tuesday nights and jade pendants, and the space between two teenagers at a wooden table was over. The only question now was what it was going to cost to bury it, and who was going to be the one left holding the bill. The meeting with Han Jung-soo happened at 8 the following morning in the study on the first floor, a room Min-jae had spent his entire childhood trying to be summoned to as rarely as possible. His father sat behind a desk the size of a small country and did not offer him a chair. Min-jae stood. He had showered and dressed with the same deliberateness he used for every appearance before his family. Pressed, composed, nothing visible on the surface, because that was the only leverage he had in this room, and he intended to use it. Han Jung-soo looked at his younger son for a long moment without speaking. He was a man who had built something that the legitimate world called influence, and the underground called power, and he wore the weight of it in his jaw and in the particular stillness of a person who had not needed to raise their voice to cause damage in a very long time. "You understand what you have done," he said. Not a question. "I understand what Seong-woo told you I have done," Min-jae said. "Same thing." "It isn't." His father's eyes moved, just barely. "You are telling me the recordings are inaccurate." Min-jae said nothing. "No." His father folded his hands on the desk. "You are telling me that what you feel about the situation changes the nature of it. It does not. The nature of it is this. You are the designated successor of a family that is currently negotiating a political alliance that requires you to present as a stable, appropriate candidate for the Choi heir. You have instead been conducting a clandestine relationship with the daughter of our domestic staff, a black American girl." He said it without particular venom, which was somehow worse than venom. He said it like a line item. "This is a liability I did not create and will not maintain. She has nothing to do with the Choi negotiation. She has everything. She is 17 years old and she is going to MIT, and she has never once asked me for anything connected to this family." Min-jae heard the edge in his own voice and kept it controlled, just barely, the way you keep a hand flat on a surface that is vibrating. "She is not a liability. She is a person." His father looked at him for a long moment. When Han Jung-soo looked at something, it felt like being measured against a standard you had not been given prior access to. "The girl's scholarship is administered through a foundation with which we have significant influence," he said. "The mother's employment contract is month to month and subject to immediate review. These are not threats, Min-jae. They are the architecture of the situation. I'm letting you see the architecture so that you can make an informed decision." The room went very still. Min-jae stood in the quiet and understood, with a clarity that felt like something physical, that the building he was standing inside had just shown him exactly what it was made of, and that none of the materials were things he could argue against with words. "You will end it," his father said. "Cleanly, without drama. The girl and her mother remain employed and enrolled as long as there is no further complication. If there is a further complication, the architecture adjusts. Do you understand me?" Min-jae looked at his father across the desk that was the size of a small country and felt 17 years of being shaped by this man like metal, shaped by heat, and felt the shape of it in his own bones, and hated it, and stood inside it anyway because there was not yet anything else to stand inside. "I understand you," he said. He left the study and went to find Naomi before his father could get there first, because if anyone was going to tell her what the architecture looked like, it was going to be him. He found her in the garden, not at the bench near the plum tree. She was smarter than that now. and so was he. But standing near the far stone wall where the hedges grew thick enough to block the sight lines from the upper windows, her coat pulled tight around her, and her breath making small clouds in the January cold. She had her back to him when he came through the side door, but she turned before he reached her, like she had heard his specific footsteps and catalogued them against every other set of footsteps in the estate. Her face told him she already knew it was bad. What she didn't know yet was the specific shape of bad, and he was about to give it to her, and standing in the cold with the garden stones hard under his feet, he thought that this was possibly the worst thing he had ever been asked to do inside a life that had not been short on terrible requirements. "Tell me," she said. No preamble. No softening of the ground first. He told her. He told her about the scholarship foundation and the employment contract and the phrase architecture of the situation, which he repeated exactly as his father had delivered it because she deserved the precise words and not a gentled version of them. He watched her face as he spoke. She did not react the way people in films reacted to bad news. No crumbling, no tears coming fast. She went very still, the way she went still when she was working through a problem, her jaw set and her eyes focused somewhere past his shoulder, processing. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "He said it that way," she said finally. "Architecture." "Yes. Not a threat. Architecture." She said it again like she was testing the structural integrity of the word. "Because threats imply that you might choose differently. Architecture means the decision's already made. You just haven't been told yet which room you're standing in." "Yes," he said. She looked at him then, directly. "And what did you say back to him?" "I said I understood him." Something moved across her face. Not disappointment exactly, but adjacent to it. The slight recalibration of a person absorbing information that confirmed something they had been hoping was wrong. "That's not the same as agreeing." "No, it isn't. But it's also not fighting." He held her gaze. "I don't have the ground to fight on yet. If I fight him right now, I lose, and so do you, and so does your mother. That's not fighting, that's just being destroyed faster." She looked away. Her jaw moved. The cold moved around them both. "So what does 'I understood him' mean in practice?" she said. "What does it mean for Tuesday nights? For the kitchen? For—" "It means we can't." He said it as plainly as it deserved to be said. "Not here. Not while we're both inside this house. He's watching now. Shangwu is watching. If we give them another recording, another piece of evidence of any kind, he destroys my mother's contract. And your scholarship." She pressed her lips together. He could see her doing what she always did with difficult equations, holding the full shape of the problem in her mind without flinching from any part of it. He had watched her do it with calculus for months. It was different watching her do it with her actual life. It was one of the hardest things he had watched anyone do. "When I leave here," she said, "when I finish the academy and go to university and eventually go back to America, does the architecture change then?" "You'd be outside his reach." "And you?" Silence. The kind that had weight to it. "I'm going to build something," he said, "inside this family. I'm going to make myself necessary enough and powerful enough that my father can't move against me without losing more than he gains. That takes time. I know that is not the answer you want. It's the honest answer," she said. "I'll take the honest answer." She reached up with one hand and touched the bracelet at her wrist. Just touched it, fingers settling over the metal charms, a gesture that was so small and so unguarded that it hit him somewhere in his chest like a physical impact. "I'm not going to stop loving you because your father said architecture," she said. "I want you to know that. Whatever I do next, that's not what it means." He reached into his jacket pocket. The jade pendant sat in his palm between them. "Take it anyway," he said. "Keep it until the day comes when I can give it to you properly, under different circumstances." She looked at it for a long moment. Then she took it. "Don't make me wait forever, Min Jae." "I won't." She tucked the pendant into her coat pocket and looked at the garden wall and breathed out slowly through her nose. Then she turned and went back inside through the side door, her footsteps quiet and even on the stone path. And he stood in the cold alone and did not watch her go because he didn't trust what his face would do if he did. 3 days later, the Han family moved. It did not happen the way Min Jae had been told it would happen, cleanly, without drama. It happened the way everything in the Han family happened, which was with the precise application of maximum pressure at the point of least resistance. Mrs. Park, the Academy's administrative director, called Naomi into her office on a Thursday morning between second and third period and informed her, with the particular delicacy of a person delivering news they find personally distasteful but professionally obligatory, that her scholarship was under review. The review had been triggered by an anonymous report of conduct inconsistent with the terms of her placement. The nature of the report could not be disclosed at this time. She would be notified of the outcome within 2 weeks. Naomi sat in the chair across from Mrs. Park's desk with her hands folded in her lap and her face arranged into an expression that gave nothing away, and said, "I understand. Thank you for telling me directly." Her voice did not shake. She stood and thanked Mrs. Park again and walked out of the office and down the hallway to the bathroom at the far end of the humanities wing and locked herself in a stall and stood there for 4 minutes with both palms pressed flat against the cold metal door. Then she flushed the toilet she hadn't used, washed her hands, and went to third period. She told her mother that evening. She had spent the walk home from the subway rehearsing how to do it, how to give Danielle the information without also giving her the full weight of what it meant, which was that the Han family had already started disassembling the structure of their lives in Seoul without even waiting for Naomi to make a wrong move. Danielle heard her out sitting at the small table in their room. She was still in her work clothes. She had a cup of tea in front of her that had gone cold while Naomi was talking, and when Naomi finished, Danielle looked at the cup for a long moment and then looked at her daughter. "What did you do?" she said quietly. Not angry. Something more tired than anger. "Mom, Naomi, what did you do?" The thing about Danielle Carter was that she had survived enough to develop a very accurate intuition about the spaces between what people said and what was actually happening. She was looking at Naomi now with that intuition fully deployed, and Naomi understood that she could attempt a partial version of the truth, but that her mother would find the gap in it within about 30 seconds. She told her. Not all of it. Not the pendant. Not the garden. Not the specific weight of the word love said in the cold by a boy who meant it with everything he had. But the shape of it. The kitchen sessions, the conversations, the way it had become something neither of them had planned for. Danielle listened without interrupting. When Naomi finished, the room was very quiet. The heating unit clicked on in the wall. "He's the Han heir," Danielle said. "Yes." "Min Jae Han." "Yes." Danielle looked at the wall. Her hands were around the cold cup and her jaw was doing something complicated. Naomi had seen her mother process terrible news before. Her father's death, the debt, the cascade of bad months that had led them here. Danielle always went very quiet first. The quiet was where she organized herself before anything else could happen. "How serious?" Danielle said. "Serious," Naomi said, because her mother deserved the honest word. Danielle nodded slowly. She picked up the cup and set it back down without drinking from it. "You understand," she said, "that this family will take apart everything we have here if they decide we're a problem." "I know." "You understand that I didn't bring you to Seoul. I didn't take this position. I didn't do any of what I've done for us to lose it because—" "I know, Mom." Naomi's voice cracked slightly on the second word, and she hated it and kept going. "I know. I'm not asking you to accept it. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm just telling you the truth because you asked me." Danielle looked at her daughter for a long time. There was something in her face that Naomi had seen only rarely, a particular exhaustion that lived underneath the strength, the part that Danielle Carter kept very carefully managed and almost never let surface. "That boy," Danielle said finally, "does he know what his family is doing?" "He told me before they did it. He warned me." "That's something." Danielle pressed her lips together. "That's not enough, but it's something." They sat in the room together and didn't say anything else for a while, and the heating unit clicked and the city outside moved through its evening, and neither of them slept well that night. The second move came 6 days later. Danielle was called into a meeting with the Han family's household manager, a man named Director Kwan, who communicated exclusively in the passive voice, and who informed Danielle that her monthly contract renewal, due at the end of January, would be conditional on a satisfactory review of her performance and conduct during the preceding quarter. The review would include an assessment of whether her presence in the household had created any circumstances inconsistent with the family's interests. Danielle came home from the meeting and sat down on her bed and looked at her hands. Naomi sat beside her. She did not say anything. She reached over and took one of her mother's hands in both of hers and held it, and Danielle let her, and they sat like that while the light changed in the small window. "I cannot lose this job," Danielle said. Not distressed, just factual, the way you state a load-bearing truth. "I cannot. There is nothing to go back to. You know that." "I know." "Then you know what I'm going to ask you." Naomi did know. She had known since the bathroom stall at the academy, since she had stood behind that locked door and felt the architecture. There was that word again. She couldn't get free of it. Felt the architecture of the situation pressing against her from all directions. "I'll handle it," Naomi said. Danielle looked at her sharply. "What does that mean? You'll handle it?" "It means I'll do what needs to be done." "Naomi." "Mom." She squeezed her mother's hand once, hard, and then let go and stood up. "I need you to trust me." Danielle watched her daughter stand up and straighten and look at the wall with an expression Danielle had not seen on Naomi's face before. Not the careful, controlled competence of a girl managing her emotions, but something older and quieter and much more resolute. Something that looked, in the particular grief of it, like the face of a woman. "I trust you," Danielle said. "I just don't want you to pay a price you can't—" "I'll handle it," Naomi said again, and went to find Minji. Pete. She found him in the upper hallway outside the library, coming down from a meeting with his father's advisor. He saw her face and redirected immediately. No words, just a slight shift of direction that said, "Follow me." And she followed him to the far end of the east wing, where the window at the end of the hall looked out over the back property, and there were no cameras and no other occupants. "They moved on my mother," she said. His jaw went tight. "How?" She told him. He listened without interrupting, his shoulder against the wall, his eyes on her face. When she finished, he looked out the window. She could see the muscle working in his jaw, the very controlled version of something that was not controlled at all underneath. "I'm going to talk to my father," he said. "And say what?" "That this is beyond what was agreed. That threatening your mother's contract was not part of Minjae." Her voice was flat and clear. "He will smile at you and tell you that he is simply conducting a performance review, which is accurate, and then he will tell you that the situation has not changed and that the solution has not changed, and you will leave that room in exactly the same position you are in right now. You know that." He looked at her. His eyes were doing the thing she recognized, holding still while everything underneath moved at high speed. "Then what?" he said. She had been thinking about this since the bathroom stall. She had been thinking about it with the same focused, recursive, recheck 3 times carefulness that she applied to every problem that mattered. And she had arrived at the only answer that the architecture of the situation actually permitted. "I'm going to go to your family," she said. "Not through you, directly. I'm going to request a meeting with your father, and I'm going to sit in that room, and I'm going to tell him that I understand what he wants, and that he will have it." Minjae pushed off the wall. "No." "Yes." "Naomi, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to." She held his gaze. "Because if I don't, your family is going to slowly take apart my mother's life piece by piece until there's nothing left to hold, and she cannot survive another loss like that. I have watched her barely survive the one she already has. I am not going to let her go through another one because I wasn't willing to do a hard thing. This is not a hard thing. This is them winning. They already won, Minjae." She said it as carefully as she could, which meant she said it without cruelty but also without mercy, because it was the truth, and the truth was the only tool either of them had left. They won the moment Seongwoo put that device in the hedge. Everything since then has been them letting us understand the shape of the outcome. I'm done waiting for the shape to change. He turned away from her, faced the window. The back garden was visible below, the plum tree bare and gray in the winter light, the bench where they had sat and said things that were true and irreversible. "I will come back for you," he said. His voice was low and stripped of everything decorative. When I have built enough inside this organization that they cannot move against me without losing more than they gain. I told you that. I meant it. I know you meant it. Then don't talk about this like it's finished. It's not finished, she said, but it's paused. And while it's paused, I need my mother to be safe. He turned back around. His face was doing the thing where he had walled everything off except the surface, and she could see the effort of it in the slight tension at the corners of his eyes, the way his hands were very still at his sides. "Let me come with you," he said. "When you talk to my father, let me be in the room." That's worse. That looks like resistance. That gives him something to push back against. She shook her head. "I go alone. I'm clean about it. I give him what he wants, and I protect my mother, and I leave. And us." She looked at him for a long moment. At the boy who had built her future into a bracelet she wore on her wrist. At the heir who photographed light through windows and dreamed of Iceland and had been the first person in her life to tell her that what she wanted mattered. "And us," she said. "For now." He looked like she had hit him, which was fair because she had. But he didn't argue, because she was right, and they both knew it, and being right in a situation like this felt like nothing good at all. She requested the meeting with Han Jung-soo through the household manager the following morning. The response came back within 2 hours. The meeting was scheduled for 4 o'clock that afternoon. She spent the hours between in the room she shared with her mother, sitting at the small desk, not studying, just thinking. She held the jade pendant in her hand and turned it over and looked at the carved plum blossom and thought about what Min-jae had said about his grandmother, that she had passed it along because she wanted him to give it to someone worth giving it to. She thought about what it meant that he had decided she was that person at 17 years old in a kitchen that wasn't his, over calculus problems and instant ramen. She put the pendant in the inside pocket of her coat, pressed close to her ribs. Han Jung-soo's study felt different when she was the one sitting across from the desk instead of standing in the doorway after being told about it secondhand. It was a room designed to communicate exactly one thing to the people who sat in it, and it communicated that thing with tremendous efficiency. She sat with her back straight and her hands in her lap, and her face arranged into the same expression she had worn in Mrs. Park's office. Neutral, present, giving nothing away. Han Jung-soo looked at her for a long moment before speaking. She looked back. She did not look away first. She would not give him that. "You requested this meeting," he said. "Yes." "That was direct of you." "I thought directness was more useful than waiting." Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, nothing that close to human warmth, but a recalibration, a slight adjustment in how he was measuring her. "Speak then." She spoke. She told him that she understood the situation. That exact word, understanding, not acceptance, not defeat, and that she was prepared to remove herself from any ongoing contact with his son that could be characterized as a complication. That she intended to complete the academy year, support her mother's continued employment through appropriate conduct, and make no further demands on the Han family's attention or interests. She said all of it in a clear, even voice without a single break in it, and when she finished, she looked at him and waited. Han Jung-soo studied her the same way he had studied his son across that same desk, with the measuring quality of a man who assessed things for their structural value rather than their personal attributes. "You are more composed than I expected," he said. "I'm 17, she said. "Not 12. Another recalibration. Smaller this time. "The scholarship review will be resolved favorably. Your mother's contract will be renewed without condition." He folded his hands. "These outcomes are contingent on what you have described being accurate in practice and not merely in intention." "Understood. There is one additional matter." He reached into his desk drawer and produced an envelope, which he set on the desk between them without sliding it toward her. He simply placed it and left it there. "This is a financial arrangement that would assist your family in returning to the United States at the conclusion of your academic year, should you choose that option. It is not a condition. It is a resource." Naomi looked at the envelope. She looked at it for exactly 3 seconds and then looked back at Han Jung-soo. "I don't need your money," she said. "No," he said. But your mother might, eventually, and you will feel differently about accepting it on her behalf than on your own. He left the envelope where it was. Think about it. She stood up. She looked at the man across the desk, the man who had built a world designed to devour people like her and her mother without leaving visible marks. And she felt something happen in her chest that was not quite hatred, and not quite grief, and not quite resolution, but contained elements of all three. Thank you for your time, she said, because she was not going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her lose her register in this room. She walked to the door. Miss Carter? His voice stopped her at the threshold. She did not turn around. You would have been formidable under different circumstances. She put her hand on the doorframe, felt the cold of it under her fingers. I'm going to be formidable under these ones, she said, and walked out. She did not tell Min Jae what Han Jung-soo had said at the end. She told him the outcome, the scholarship, the contract, the terms she had agreed to, and she watched him absorb it standing in the East Wing hallway with his back very straight and his face absolutely closed. And she understood that the closed face was not coldness, but the opposite of it, and that there was nothing she could do about that right now. How long, he said, through the end of the academic year. Then my mother and I will discuss options. Options. He said the word like it had a bad taste. Naomi, don't, she said quietly. Please don't. Not right now. He stopped, gave her the quiet. He was still the person who knew when to go quiet. She looked at him in the hallway light. This boy who was going to become something terrible and magnificent and trapped, who had 3 more years of being shaped by this house before he had any real ground to stand on, who had told her the truth in a cold garden and meant every word of it. And she memorized his face the way she memorized problem sets she was afraid of forgetting, carefully, completely, with the full understanding that the memory might have to last a long time. When you have the power, she said, when the day comes, you find me. I will find you, he said. I promise. Don't break it, she said. That's the one thing I'm asking. Don't break it. He reached out and touched the bracelet at her wrist, just touched it, one finger along the metal charms, and then let his hand drop and stepped back and looked at her with everything that was not allowed to be on his face written clearly in his eyes where she could see it. She turned and walked down the hallway and did not look back because looking back was a thing she could not afford right now, and because she knew if she looked back she would see him standing there watching her go, and that image would undo something in her that she needed to keep together for what came next. What came next was harder than she knew, because 3 days later, before she could find a way to steady herself inside the terms she had agreed to, Song-woo Han did something that none of the architecture had prepared her for. He went to the academy, not to Mrs. Park, not through official channels. He arrived during the lunch period and found Park Ji-hee, quiet, sleeve-covering Ji-hee, the one person in that building who had been kind to Naomi without agenda. And he sat with her in the courtyard for 22 minutes, and what he said to her in those 22 minutes Naomi did not learn until the following morning when Ji-hee stopped coming to sit beside her in mathematics, stopped answering her texts, and walked past her in the hall with her eyes on the floor and her sleeves pulled all the way down and the expression of a person who has been shown something frightening and told they should remember it. Naomi stood in the hallway and watched her walk away, and understood, with a cold and total clarity, that this was not architecture. This was a message. This was Seong-woo Han telling her that the agreement she had made with his father had boundaries he did not consider himself bound by, and that the price of any complication, any resistance, any attempt to maintain something real inside the terms she had accepted would be paid not by her, but by the people around her. She stood in the hallway until the passing period ended and the doors closed and she was alone. And then she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and stood very still and felt the shape of the thing she was inside of change beneath her feet into something with no floor. She had thought she was negotiating with a family. She had been standing inside a machine. She did not go back to the room. She did not go to the kitchen. She did not go to the bench near the plum tree or the East Wing hallway or any of the places inside the Han estate that had accumulated meaning over the past 4 months. She walked out through the academy's front gate into the February cold and kept walking until she found a bench 3 blocks away near a convenience store with a broken light above its entrance, and she sat down on that bench and put her hands between her knees and stared at the pavement and thought. Not about Min-jae. Not yet. Not about the pendant against her ribs, or the bracelet on her wrist, or the words said in the garden. She pushed all of that to the back and thought about Ji-hee, about a quiet girl with 2 long sleeves who had asked to check her math and had been the one person who offered basic human decency inside a building full of people performing their superiority. And she thought about what Seong-woo Han had done to that girl in 22 minutes in a courtyard, and she thought about what kind of person does that. What kind of person reaches past the target, past the actual threat, and touches someone peripheral and harmless just to demonstrate the radius of their reach. A person who has done it before. A person who does it routinely. A person for whom other people's lives are not lives, but instruments. She sat on the bench until her hands went numb, and then she stood up and went back to the estate because there was nowhere else to go, and because going back was not the same as surrendering, and because she needed to see Min-jae before she made a single additional decision. She found him in the kitchen. He was standing at the counter with a glass of water he hadn't drunk, staring at nothing, and when she came through the door, he looked at her. And whatever he saw on her face made him set the glass down with a care that meant he was very close to not being careful at all. "What happened?" he said. She told him about Ji-hee. She told him in the same flat, clear voice she had used in Han Jung-soo's study, because that voice was a tool and she needed tools right now more than she needed to feel things. She told him the sequence. Seong-woo at the academy, the courtyard, 22 minutes, what Ji-hee's face had looked like this morning in the hallway. Min-jae listened. His face went through something while she talked that she had never seen on it before. Not the controlled surface, not the wall, but something underneath the wall breaking its way partially through. His jaw was hard and his eyes were very still, and when she finished, he turned and put both hands flat on the counter and stood there with his back to her and breathed. "He wasn't authorized to do that," he said. "I know. My father's terms were specific, the scholarship, the contract, nothing else." "I know, Min-jae." Seong-woo went outside the terms on his own because he wanted to. He turned around. His eyes were dark and something in them was not entirely controlled anymore. "Because this isn't about protecting the family. It never was. This is about him." "Yes," she said. "I know. I figured that out 3 minutes after it happened." She looked at him. "What I don't know is what to do about it. Because your father's terms I can work with. Your father wants an outcome, and he will maintain the terms that produce the outcome. Seong-woo doesn't want an outcome. Seong-woo wants to watch something break." He pushed off the counter. He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of her, and she could see it in him now. The thing she had only caught glimpses of before. The version of him that this house had been building for 17 years. Not the heir who sat across from her at a wooden table. The other one. The one that lived underneath and was being called forward by the particular situation of having someone he loved put inside a machine and ground against. "I'm going to handle Seong-woo," he said. "How?" "Leave that part to me." "Min-jae. Naomi." His voice had a different quality to it. Still controlled, but the control was coming from somewhere new, somewhere deeper and less gentle. "There are things I know how to do inside this family that I have been choosing not to do. I have been choosing not to do them because doing them means becoming something specific, something I don't want to be." He looked at her. "I am telling you that I am going to do them anyway. For this." She looked at him for a long time. She looked at his face, the face she had been memorizing for 4 months, and she saw the moment she had known was coming eventually, and had been hoping was still a long way away. The moment where the distance between the boy who wanted to photograph Iceland and the man his family was building narrowed to something she could measure. "Don't do it for me," she said. "I'm doing it for you." "Don't." Her voice cracked slightly, and she let it crack, because it was true, and it deserved the crack. "Do it, because Seong-woo is wrong. Do it because what he did to Ji-hee is wrong. Do it because your father's machine is wrong, and you know it, and you've always known it. But don't do it for me, because I cannot be the reason you become something you don't want to be. I will not carry that." He looked at her. The kitchen was very quiet. "You are the reason I want to be anything at all," he said. She put both hands on his face and held it, and looked at him directly and said, "Then be something worth coming back to." She let go, stepped back, put her hands at her sides. "I'm going to talk to my mother tonight. We're going to make a plan. I need a week. A week? 7 days. Can you hold Xiongwu off for 7 days? Something moved in his jaw. Yes. Then give me 7 days? She turned and walked out of the kitchen and up to the room and sat across from her mother, and they talked for 3 hours. And at the end of it, Danielle Carter, who had not cried in front of her daughter since Marcus Carter's funeral, pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling for a long moment, and then looked at Naomi and said, "Okay." Just that. Okay. Which meant, "I trust you." Which meant, "I'm terrified." Which meant, "We go." Naomi spent the next 6 days doing 3 things simultaneously. She attended the academy every day without variation, on time, uniformed correctly, speaking to no one outside what the schedule required. She submitted 2 weeks of coursework in advance. She met with her academic advisor and discussed her progress with the focused attention of a student committed to her program's completion, which she was, and she requested that her advisor note her academic standing in writing, which the advisor did, because Naomi Carter's academic standing was exceptional, and there was nothing in it that gave anyone grounds for anything. She called MIT, not the admissions office, the engineering department. She spoke to a professor whose research on distributed systems architecture she had found in a journal 2 years prior and had read 3 times. She told him she was a prospective student finishing her 3rd year of a Korean high school program and that she had a question about a specific problem in his most recent paper. They talked for 40 minutes. At the end of it, he said, "You should apply." And she said, "I intend to." And when she hung up, she sat with the phone in her hand and felt something that was not quite hope, but was in the same neighborhood. She wrote down the name of a lawyer in Chicago, a woman who had helped her mother navigate Marcus Carter's death and the subsequent insurance dispute. She wrote down 2 other names given to her by the first. She did not know yet what she would need them for. She knew that having them was different from not having them. On the 5th day, Min Jae found her in the East Wing hallway and told her in a low, quick voice that Seong-woo had been occupied since their conversation with the situation inside the organization. A specific accounting problem that Min Jae had surfaced to his father through legitimate channels, a problem that Seong-woo had been concealing for 8 months, and that now required his full personal attention to resolve. He said it with his eyes straight ahead and his voice completely level, and she looked at the side of his face and understood that the thing she had seen forming in him in the kitchen had found a specific shape. "Is it real?" she said. "The accounting problem." "Everything I told my father is accurate." "That's not what I asked." A pause. "The problem has existed for 8 months. I became aware of it 3 months ago. I chose this week to disclose it." She looked at him. "You've been holding it, saving it." "I've been deciding when it was most useful." He looked at her. "Welcome to this family." She didn't say anything. She wasn't sure what there was to say. He had used the machinery of the Han organization against one of its own members to protect her, which meant he had taken his first step into operating as the heir rather than resisting it, which meant the distance between the boy she loved and the man he was becoming had closed another degree. She had told him not to do it for her. She suspected he had done it partly for her, and partly for himself, and partly because Seong-woo had been doing it for years to people who couldn't fight back. And that mixed justification was probably the most honest version of who Min Jae-han was becoming. She put it aside. There was no time to process it yet, and she knew it, and she filed it in the part of her mind where she kept things to return to later. On the 7th day, she packed. She did not tell him she was leaving until the night before. She found him at 10 o'clock after her mother was asleep, in the garden near the plum tree. She had sent him a message that said only the bench, and he was there when she arrived, standing rather than sitting, his coat collar up against the February wind. He looked at her bag. She was carrying the same rolling carry-on she had arrived with 4 months ago, already packed, standing at her side. "When?" he said. "Tomorrow morning. 7 o'clock car." "Where?" "We're going to my mother's cousin in Busan for the rest of the academic year. It's far enough from Seoul that it's outside the radius of what your family can conveniently monitor without making an effort. I'll finish my coursework remotely. I've already arranged it with the academic office." She looked at him. "It took 4 days to set up. Your mother will receive formal notice from the household manager that my mother is voluntarily relocating for family reasons. There's no conflict. There's no drama. It just ends cleanly. He stood in the cold and looked at her and said nothing for a moment. The wind moved through the plum tree above them. Busan, he said. Yes. And then America. Probably. After the year ends, we'll see what my mother's situation looks like. She paused. MIT applications open in the fall. He looked at the bag. Something crossed his face. Not grief exactly. The word didn't fit right. It was bigger than that and less organized. You planned all of this in 7 days. I planned all of this in 7 days while attending school full-time and submitting 2 weeks of advanced coursework, she said, and there was no pride in it, just the statement of a fact that was true. He looked at her then with an expression she was going to carry for a long time, like she was something he was trying to photograph with only his eyes, like he was working very hard to fix the exact quality of her in the low amber light. I made you something, he said. He reached into his coat and brought out a second jade pendant. Twin to the one he had given her, carved from the same pale green stone, the same plum blossom shape. He held it in his palm between them. My grandmother had 2, he said. She gave me one. She told me once that she had kept the other for the day I might need it. He looked at the pendant. I've been carrying both of them since December. I kept waiting for a right moment. I don't think the right moment is coming, so this one will have to do. Naomi took it. She held both pendants, the first in her coat pocket, the second in her hand, and the weight of them together was so small it was almost nothing, which was the most wrong thing about this moment, that something this heavy could be this light. Min Jae. I know, he said. I was going to say, don't wait for me. That's what I was going to say. Build what you need to build. Become what you need to become. Don't hold your life open like a wound because I'm not in it yet. I've been trying to say the opposite thing to you twice now, and you keep saying don't. Because I mean it. Her voice was steady. She had been holding it steady for weeks, and she was going to hold it steady through this too. The promise is enough. The promise is real. But I need to know you're not going to spend the next 5 years standing still, waiting for something that might take longer than 5 years. He looked at her. How long? I don't know. That's the honest answer. Give me a number. Not a promise. Just a number. She thought about it. About MIT and the years of building Carter innovations into something real, and the specific weight of becoming the person she needed to become in order to stand eventually on ground high enough that the Han family couldn't touch her. 10 years, she said. Maybe less. But 10 is what I'm preparing for. Something in his face did a slow, quiet thing. Not breaking, more like a settlement, a structure finding its load-bearing points under new weight. Okay, he said. Okay. I'll be here in 10 years. You'll be somewhere, she said. I'll find you or you'll find me. I'll find you, he said. That's not negotiable. She looked at him for a long moment and memorized his face the way she had been doing all along. And then she stepped forward and put her arms around him, and he put his arms around her, and they stood under the plum tree in the cold February garden and held on with the specific grip of people who understand that when they let go, something that has been one thing is going to become 2 separate things moving in different directions. She let go first. She always was going to let go first. She picked up her bag. She walked to the side door without looking back, the same way she had walked down the East Wing hallway 3 weeks ago, because the rule was the same. Looking back was something she could not afford. Behind her, she heard him say her name. Just her name. Once. Low and careful, the way he said things he meant. She kept walking. She was in the car at 7 o'clock. Danielle sat beside her with her hands in her lap and her eyes forward and did not ask her daughter any questions, which was the most generous thing Danielle Carter had ever given her. As the car pulled down the long driveway, Naomi looked through the window. Min Jae was standing at the front entrance, just standing there in the gray February morning in his coat, not running, not reaching, just watching her go with his hands at his sides and his face open in a way it almost never was where anyone could see it. She pressed her fingertips against the cold glass. The car turned at the gate and the entrance disappeared and the Han estate was behind her, and she turned forward and looked at the road ahead and held both jade pendants in her closed fist against her sternum and breathed. 9 years. 9 years is a specific and enormous amount of time. It is enough time to become unrecognizable. It is enough time to build an empire or lose one. It is enough time for a 15-year-old girl who ate instant ramen alone at a wooden table in someone else's kitchen to become a CEO whose company handled infrastructure contracts for 4 governments on 3 continents. It is enough time for a 17-year-old boy who photographed light through windows to become the most feared operational head of a crime dynasty in South Korea. A man whose name made financial institutions in Seoul careful about which calls they returned. It was enough time and almost not enough. Naomi lost her mother in year 4. Danielle Carter died in a hospital in Busan on a Tuesday in March, with Naomi holding her hand. And the thing that killed her was not dramatic, not violence, not crisis, just the body of a woman who had survived too much finally presenting the bill. Naomi sat in the hospital room for a long time after, holding a hand that was no longer warm, and felt something in her own architecture shift into a configuration it would not shift back out of. She flew to Chicago for the funeral. She buried her mother next to Marcus Carter in the cemetery on the south side, where they had first buried him on a cold afternoon 5 years prior. And she stood at the grave in the February wind and did not cry because she had used everything she had at the hospital, and there was nothing left for the cemetery. And that was fine. That was something she understood her mother would not have required of her. She flew back and she finished her degree, and she built the company. Carter Innovations started in a 2-room office in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with Naomi and 2 engineers she had recruited from her MIT program, and a contract with a municipal government in Connecticut that paid barely enough to cover 3 salaries. In year 2, it was a 12-person team. In year 4, it was 140 people in a Series B round that 3 major funds competed for. In year 6, Carter Innovations was a global company with offices in 4 countries, and Naomi Carter was on the cover of a magazine that she bought at an airport and looked at for about 45 seconds, and then put in a recycling bin because she had a flight to catch. She was 24. She was 26. She was 30. She did not remove the bracelet. She carried both jade pendants in the inside pocket of every coat she owned. She did not look for him. That had been the agreement with herself. Not because she didn't think about it, not because 1,000 moments over 9 years hadn't made her reach for her phone or come close to making a call, but because looking for him while she was still building would have meant coming to him as the person she was instead of the person she intended to be. And she was not going to do that. She was going to arrive on her own ground or not at all. In year 8, she heard his name in a meeting in Singapore, attached to a Han organization land deal that overlapped with a government infrastructure contract her company was bidding on. She sat in the conference room and heard Kang Min-jae Han said, by a man in an expensive suit who said it the way people said it by then, carefully, with a particular respect that was adjacent to fear. And she kept her face completely neutral and made a note on her legal pad and moved to the next agenda item. She was not ready yet. She was close. Not yet. In year 9, she was ready. The trigger was not something she chose. The trigger was an announcement that appeared in her news feed on a Thursday morning in March, while she was in her office in Chicago, a city she had returned to deliberately because it was hers, and she had decided that nothing in her life was going to be evacuated permanently just because it was difficult to be in it. Han Kang Min-jae, operational head of the Han organization, was engaged to Yoona Choi, daughter of Choi Byung-soo, head of the Choi crime syndicate. The engagement had been announced at a formal gathering at the Han estate. The alliance was described as a consolidation of the 2 most powerful criminal organizations in South Korea. The wedding was scheduled for the following autumn. Naomi read the announcement twice. She put her phone face down on her desk. She looked at the window. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago did in March. Gray sky, cold light, the city existing without apology for how hard it was to be in it, which was one of the things she had always appreciated about it. She thought about the kitchen table, the calculus, the weight of a jade pendant in a boy's palm at 17 years old. She picked up her phone and called her chief of staff. "Clear my Seoul schedule," she said. "I'm going in 2 weeks. The Han infrastructure bid doesn't close until I'm not going for the bid." She looked at the window. "Get me in the room. Whatever room he's going to be in. Get me a legitimate reason to be standing in the same building as the Han organization's leadership. A pause. That's a crime family, Naomi. I know what it is. I've known what it is for 9 years. She stood up from her desk. I'm going. Find me a door. The door turned out to be a technology partnership proposal between Carter Innovations and a legitimate Han subsidiary, a smart infrastructure company that the Han organization used as its public-facing development arm. The meeting was arranged through proper channels. It was a real proposal with real numbers and real strategic value. Naomi had built it herself over 4 days, working 18-hour days with 2 of her best analysts, because whatever door she walked through had to be a door she had actually built, not one she had borrowed. The meeting was scheduled at a hotel in Gangnam, neutral ground, technically, corporate venue, conference rooms with glass walls and catering carts, and the very ordinary architecture of legitimate business. The Han organization was sending its head of strategic partnerships and 2 senior advisors. Naomi arrived 20 minutes early, which was her habit for every meeting that mattered. She was wearing a charcoal suit she had bought in Milan and shoes that cost more than the monthly rent on the first Carter Innovations office, not because she needed armor, but because she had learned that the material language of authority was real and that she was fluent in it now, and that fluency was a tool like any other. She was standing at the conference room window looking out over Gangnam when the door opened. She turned. The man who walked in was not the head of strategic partnerships. He was taller than she remembered, which was something she had not accounted for. The suit was dark and excellent, and he wore it with the ease of a man who had stopped performing authority somewhere along the way and had simply become it. His face was the same face. She had memorized it correctly. All those years ago, she had gotten the shape of it right. But 9 years had done things to it, made it harder, stripped some of the remaining softness from around the eyes, added something to the jaw that was not there at 17. Kangmin Jae Han closed the door behind him and stood across the conference room from her and looked at her the same way he had looked at the light in the kitchen window 9 years ago, like something he had been waiting to understand. Neither of them said anything for a moment that stretched past the point where normal people would have broken it. Then he said, "You're early." "I'm always early," she said. "You're not the head of strategic partnerships." "No. You sent yourself instead." When I saw who was leading the proposal, he looked at her. His voice was the same, lower than expected, flat and careful. But underneath the flatness was something that 9 years had not been able to smooth out. Something that was still exactly what it had been at a kitchen table in January. "I sent myself instead." She felt her heart doing something it hadn't done in 9 years, and she let it do it and kept her face level and said, "We should sit down." "Yes," he said, "we should." They moved to the table and the chairs and the very ordinary architecture of the conference room, and outside the glass walls, the hotel moved with its normal business, and no one watching would have seen anything except 2 executives in a meeting about infrastructure contracts. And inside the room, 9 years of distance collapsed into the space between 2 chairs at a table and waited, very still, for someone to decide what to do with it. "I saw the engagement announcement," she said. His jaw moved. "I know. Is it real?" He looked at her directly. "Is that why you came?" "Answer the question, Min Jae." He put his hands on the table between them, flat, the same gesture she remembered from the kitchen, the gesture of a person laying down the performance and offering what was underneath it instead. "My family is in crisis," he said. "A rival syndicate has been destabilizing our operations for 14 months. We have internal betrayal at the senior level. The Choi Alliance is my father's solution. Consolidate, neutralize the external threat, replace the internal rot with Choi loyalty. He told me it was my duty." His eyes were on her. "I told him no." She looked at him. "You told him no." 3 weeks ago. In that same study, at that same desk. Something crossed his face, the shadow of a thing that had cost something significant. "I showed him what I've been carrying for 9 years. He reached into his jacket and set something on the table between them. The jade pendant. The original one, the first one, his grandmother's. And I told him some promises are stronger than what he was asking me to do." The conference room was very quiet. Naomi looked at the pendant on the table. She reached into her own jacket and set both of hers beside it, the one he had given her first, the twin he had given her in the garden the night before she left. 3 jade pendants on a conference table in Gangnam, pale green, carved into plum blossoms, the physical weight of 9 years sitting between 2 people who had been 15 and 17 and stupid and brave and had meant every word. She looked up at him. "Your family's crisis," she said, "the rival syndicate, the internal betrayal. You said you have internal betrayal at the senior level." "Yes." "Seong-woo," she said. The look on his face confirmed it before he spoke. "He has been feeding operational intelligence to the rival syndicate for 2 years. We found the evidence 6 weeks ago. He was building an exit, planning to defect with enough leverage to establish himself independently." His jaw was tight. He miscalculated how much I had learned about building things inside this organization that he couldn't see. She thought about a small recording device in a hedge, about Ji-hee's face in a hallway, about the word architecture said in a room designed to make people feel small. "Is he contained?" she said. "Yes." "And your father?" "My father is managing a crisis that requires every resource he has. He does not currently have the surplus to manage me as well." He looked at her. "Which is why I'm sitting in this conference room instead of someone from strategic partnerships, because I have approximately a window, not long, not guaranteed, and I needed to use it." She looked at him across the pendants and the table, and 9 years of distance that was not, she now understood, the same thing as 9 years of absence. "Carter Innovations is a $2 billion company," she said. "I know. I have contracts with 4 governments. I have a legal team that has fought 3 injunctions and won 2 of them. I have ground, Min-jae, my own ground. I am not walking back into this as the girl they threw out." "I know that," he said. "I have watched your company for 6 years. I know exactly what you built and what it cost and what it means." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not asking you to come back to anything. I'm asking if what was real 9 years ago is still real now." She looked at him, at the face she had memorized, at the man assembled from the boy she had known, harder and more complex and still, underneath it all, looking at her the way he looked at light through windows. "It's still real," she said. He exhaled. Something in his shoulders that had been held very tight released by a fraction. "Then I need to tell you something. About the crisis. About what I'm planning to do inside this organization. Not for you. You told me not to do it for you, so I'm not. But for the specific reason that if we are going to be in each other's lives, you need to know the full shape of what you're walking toward." "Tell me," she said. He told her. He talked for 40 minutes, and by the time he was done, the catering cart had come and gone untouched outside the glass wall, and the light in the room had shifted with the afternoon. And Naomi sat across from him with her hands folded on the table, and her face still, and her mind moving at the speed it moved when she was working through something that had enormous consequence and no easy solution. He was not asking her to save him. She had been right about that. He had built genuine power inside the Han organization, the kind that came from being indispensable rather than just designated. And he had a plan that was not reckless and was not naive, and it involved dismantling the structural crime elements of the organization over a period of years while redirecting its legitimate assets toward above-ground enterprise. It was the kind of plan that only someone who had spent 9 years learning the internal architecture of a criminal dynasty from the inside could construct. And it was not complete, and it was not without risk, and it was real. She thought about what he had said in the kitchen at 17. What I want and what I'm going to do are 2 different conversations. They weren't different conversations anymore. She picked up the 3 pendants from the table and held them in her closed hand. She felt their weight. Still almost nothing. Still impossibly heavy. "I need 48 hours, she said. "I need to talk to my legal team. I need to look at the structural side of what you've described and tell you what I see from the outside, because you've been inside it so long that there are things you might not be seeing clearly." 48 hours, he said, "and then we talk again. Somewhere that's not a conference room in Gangnam." "Where?" She thought about it. "Somewhere with windows," she said. "I want to see what you photograph now." Something happened in his face that she had not seen in 9 years. and had not been sure she would see again. Something that was not quite a smile, but was what lived in the same territory, the thing that existed in him before the Han organization finished building itself around him. "I still photograph everything," he said. "I know," she said. "I Googled you in year 3 and found a photography account. You used a pseudonym, but you used the same compositional style, and I recognized the light." He stared at her. "You found Kim Min-jae Photography. You need a better pseudonym." She stood up, straightened her jacket, put the 3 pendants in her pocket. 48 hours. I'll have my assistant send a location." She picked up her portfolio and walked to the conference room door and put her hand on the handle and felt 9 years standing in the room behind her like weather. She turned around. He was standing at the table looking at her with the pendants gone and the table empty between them and his face open in the February afternoon light coming through the Gangnam windows. And he looked like himself. Not the heir, not the crime boss, not the man the underworld had built. Just the person who had been inside all of those things for 9 years, still intact, still there, waiting to see what she was going to do. "You didn't break it," she said. "No," he said. "I didn't." She opened the door. Outside, the Han family was collapsing and rebuilding, and Seongwoo was contained, and Han Jung-soo was managing a crisis, and the rival syndicate was pressing from every direction, and the entire structure that had spent 9 years as the architecture of her life was cracking along its seams. And inside that crack, barely wide enough to step through, was something that had been waiting since a cold garden in February, with a plum tree standing bare above it. She stepped through the door into the hotel corridor and kept walking, and felt, for the first time in 9 years, like she was walking towards something instead of away from it. Behind her, through the glass wall, Min Jae-han stood at the conference table with both hands flat on the surface and his head slightly bowed, breathing, and anyone watching from the corridor would have seen only a man taking a moment before his next meeting. Only someone who knew the specific weight of 9 years would have understood that what they were actually watching was a man who had just found the ground he had been building toward all along, and was standing on it at last, and was not going to move. The 48 hours did not go the way either of them planned. Naomi was in her hotel room at 11 o'clock that night, her legal team's call still running on her laptop, 3 of her senior advisors visible in their respective boxes on the screen, Marcus Webb from the Chicago office, Soo Jin Park from the Seoul satellite, and Daniel Okafor from London, when her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go. Then something made her pick up. It was a woman's voice, older, careful in the way of people who have measured their words for so long that caution has become the texture of how they speak. "Miss Carter, my name is Han Soo-yeon. I am Min Jae's mother." Naomi looked at the laptop screen. She held up one finger to her team, and they went quiet. "I'm listening," she said. "I need to meet with you. Tonight, if possible. Not at the Han estate. There's a tea house in Bukchon. I will send the address. I understand this is an unusual request." "It's an unusual request," Naomi said. "Yes, I'm making it anyway." A pause. "There are things you do not know about the current situation that Min Jae does not know I know. I think you should hear them before tomorrow." Naomi looked at the window. Outside, Seoul moved through its nighttime without particular concern for the specific gravity of this moment. "Give me an hour," she said. She told her team to hold and dressed, and took the address and went. The tea house was the kind of place that had existed in that alley for probably 60 years. Narrow front, paper screens, the smell of roasted barley and old wood. Han Soo-yeon was already there when Naomi arrived, sitting at a low table near the back, her hands around a cup she wasn't drinking from. She was a woman in her late 50s who wore her age with the composure of someone who had decided a long time ago that composure was non-negotiable, regardless of what the circumstances were doing. Naomi sat across from her and said nothing, and waited. Han Soo-yeon looked at her for a moment. "You're not what I expected," she said, in English that was careful and precise. "What did you expect?" "I don't know, something easier to dismiss." She looked at her cup. "I dismissed you 9 years ago. I want you to know that I'm aware of that." Naomi kept her face still. "Why am I here?" "Because my husband is planning something for tomorrow that Min Jae does not know about, and I have spent 30 years watching this family operate, and I know what that planning looks like, and I cannot—" She stopped. Her jaw moved. "I cannot watch my son walk into it without warning him, and I cannot warn him without your help." Naomi looked at her. At this woman who had sat in a room 9 years ago while Han Jung-soo laid out the architecture of Naomi's removal from her son's life, and had said nothing and had allowed it, and was now sitting in a tea house in Bukchon with her hands around a cold cup and something in her face that was not quite guilt but was related to it. "Tell me," Naomi said. Han Soo-yeon told her. The rival syndicate, the one that had been destabilizing Han operations for 14 months, had not appeared organically. It had been constructed, funded through shell companies and staffed through intermediaries, built specifically to create the crisis that would require a Choi alliance, which would then allow Choi Byung-soo to absorb the Han organization through a marriage consolidation that looked like a rescue but functioned as an acquisition. The architect of that construction was not the Choi family. It was Han Jung-soo. Naomi sat very still. "He built the threat himself," she said. Flat, making sure she had the shape of it right. Over 2 years, using subsidiary accounts that Min-jae had no visibility into. The internal betrayal Min-jae found, Seong-woo, that was real. Seong-woo was genuinely selling intelligence, but he was selling it to an organization that my husband had already compromised. Seong-woo thought he was defecting. He was being managed. Han Soo-yeon's voice was level in the way of someone holding something very heavy with both hands and not allowing themselves to put it down. My husband needed a crisis large enough to justify the Choi consolidation without Min-jae's resistance. Min-jae would not have accepted the marriage under normal circumstances. He needed to believe the organization was genuinely threatened. "So Min-jae's refusal," Naomi said. "When Min-jae refused the engagement 3 weeks ago, it was not planned for. My husband built a machine to produce a specific outcome, and my son refused the outcome. And now the machine is still running, and my husband does not know how to stop it cleanly without revealing what he built." She looked at Naomi directly. "He is planning to remove Min-jae from operational leadership tomorrow. Not discreetly, formally. He has already spoken to the Han organization's senior council. He is going to frame Min-jae's refusal of the Choi alliance as a breach of organizational duty and use it to justify a leadership transfer to a council structure that my husband controls entirely." The tea house was quiet. Somewhere behind the paper screen, a kettle was doing something small and domestic. "Why are you telling me this?" Naomi said. "Not why you feel you should, why you actually are." Han Soo-yeon looked at her hands. "Because I watched my son run after your car 9 years ago," she said. "And I have not forgiven myself for the part I played in that. And because he is the only thing my husband built that is actually worth something, and my husband is about to destroy him to protect a machine, and I am not able to watch that happen and do nothing." She looked up. "And because you came back. I heard you came back on your own ground. I wanted to see if that was true." Naomi looked at this woman who had failed her son 9 years ago and was trying, imperfectly and late and with clear awareness of both those facts, to do something different now. She thought about what her mother would have said about that. Danielle Carter had believed, with the particular faith of a woman who had seen enough of people to know their full range, that almost anyone could do better than their worst moment if the stakes were high enough and the moment was right. "I need to call Min-jae," Naomi said. "Yes. And I need whatever documentation you have of your husband's subsidiary accounts. The construction of the rival syndicate. Whatever is traceable." Han Soo-yeon reached into her coat and set a folded envelope on the table. "I have been keeping records for 14 months, she said, "since I understood what he was doing." Naomi looked at the envelope. She did not pick it up yet. "You've had this for 14 months. "Yes." "Why didn't you go to Min-jae 14 months ago?" A silence that had the weight of 30 years of marriage in it. "Because I was still deciding whose side I was on," Han Soo-yeon said. "I am done deciding." Naomi picked up the envelope. She called Min-jae from the alley outside the tea house. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he hadn't been sleeping, which meant he had spent the last several hours in the same state she had, wound tight, moving through the implications of the afternoon at high speed. "I need you to listen to me for 5 minutes without talking," she said. "Okay," she told him. She gave it to him in the same flat, clear sequence she had used for every hard thing in the past 9 years. The shape first, then the details, then the implications. She heard his breathing on the other end of the call change quality twice. Once when she told him about the constructed rival syndicate, and once when she told him about the council meeting his father had already arranged. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Where did you get this?" he said. "Your mother." Another silence, longer this time. "She came to you." "Yes." She heard him breathe. "How much documentation?" 14 months of subsidiary account records, enough to show the construction of the syndicate and trace the funding through at least 4 intermediary shells. "My legal team can have a preliminary analysis by 6 in the morning. The council meeting is at 9. "I know, we have 3 hours. She heard him move, and the sound of someone standing, of a room being crossed. "Naomi." "I know. If we take this to the council without preparation, my father will—" "I'm not taking it to the council," she said. "I'm taking it to 2 people on the council who I know have been uncomfortable with the Choi consolidation because of what it means for their own operational autonomy. I spent 2 hours with my Seoul analyst this afternoon reviewing Han Organization Council structure. There are 3 members who benefit more from Minji's continued leadership than from a Choi absorption. I need their names confirmed, and I need a way to reach them tonight." He said the names. She wrote them down. "You spent 2 hours analyzing our council structure," he said. "I do due diligence on every organization I consider partnering with." "We are not a partnership." "Not yet," she said. "Give me the contact information." He gave her the contact information, and she went back to her hotel room, and her team was still on the call, and she said, "New direction. Here is what we are doing for the next 3 hours." And they did it. By 5 in the morning, 3 things were true. The first was that Webb had completed a preliminary trace of the subsidiary accounts in Han Soo-yeon's documentation and confirmed the construction of the rival syndicate was legible in the financial record, not airtight, not courtroom ready, but clear enough to show anyone looking honestly at it exactly what Han Jung-soo had built and why. The second was that Naomi had spoken by phone to 2 of the 3 council members Min-jae had named. Both calls had been brief and uncomfortable in the particular way of conversations where everyone in them already understands the implication and nobody wants to be the first to name it directly. Both council members had listened. Neither had committed. Both had asked for the documentation to be sent to a private address by 7 o'clock. She sent it at 6:55. The third thing was that Min-jae arrived at her hotel at 5:30, let in by the front desk with a card she had left for him, and came through the door of her room looking like a man who had not slept and had no intention of performing otherwise. He was in dark clothes with his coat still on and his hair not arranged and his face doing nothing decorative at all. And he looked at the room, the laptop, the papers, the 2 empty coffee cups, the legal pad covered in her handwriting, and then he looked at her. "You've been working all night," he said. "So have you." "I've been thinking." "You've been actually working." He looked at the legal pad. "Is that the council analysis?" "And the documentation breakdown and the contact log and the preliminary response strategy for the 9 o'clock meeting, depending on which way the 2 council members go." She put the pen down. "Sit down, Min-jae. You're making the room feel smaller." He sat. Not at the desk, on the edge of the chair near the window, leaning forward, with his elbows on his knees. The early Seoul light was starting at the window behind him, gray and tentative. He looked at her with the look she had been cataloging since a kitchen in January 9 years ago, the one where he was holding still while everything underneath moved fast. "My father built this," he said. Not a question. He had had the night to absorb it, and this was where he had arrived. "Yes." He built a crisis and then offered to solve it, the way you set a fire and then arrive with water. The Choi consolidation was always the goal. The crisis was engineered to make it feel necessary. She looked at him. "He needed you to believe the organization was genuinely threatened so you'd accept the marriage. When you refused, the machine kept running because he'd already put too many pieces in motion to stop it quietly." Seong-woo. His jaw moved. Seong-woo was real. The betrayal was real. "Yes." But your father knew about Seongwoo's defection 6 months before you found the evidence. He let it run because it was useful. It made the crisis feel genuine from the inside. She paused. Your brother was being played by two people simultaneously and knew about neither of them. Min-jae looked at the window. Something moved across his face that she didn't try to name because it didn't have a clean name. What a person feels when they discover that the structure they have been living inside was built on a lie by the person who was supposed to be its foundation. He is still my father, he said. I know. Whatever happens today, whatever the council does, he is still stopped. I'm not asking you to understand that. I'm just saying it. I understand it, she said. My father was not a perfect man, and I loved him without condition, and I still do. Understanding it doesn't change what has to happen. He looked at her. What has to happen? Your father has to be removed from operational control of the Han organization, not destroyed. I'm not in the business of destroying people, and I'm not going to start with your father. But the documentation goes to the council, and the council has to do what it does with it. And the outcome of that is that Han Jung-soo no longer runs this organization. She held his gaze. And then you do. Differently than he did, the way you described yesterday. He breathed. Looked at the light in the window. You said you wanted to see what I photograph now. I meant it. Naomi. He looked at her. His voice had dropped to the register it went to when he was being very exact about something. I want to be clear about what I'm asking for. Not the organization, not this meeting, what I am actually asking for. I know what you're asking for. I want to hear you say it. She looked at this man who had carried a jade pendant under his expensive suits for 9 years and refused every arranged marriage and built real power inside a machine he despised, and had chosen her over the one thing his entire life had been designed to make him protect. And she thought about a kitchen table and a calculus problem and the specific quality of being heard by someone for the first time. You're asking me if we're doing this, she said, actually doing this. Not the company partnership, not the strategic alliance. Us. Yes. The answer is yes, she said. It was always going to be yes. I just needed my own ground to stand on first. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he put his face in his hands and stayed like that for about 10 seconds, which was more than she had ever seen him allow in front of another person, and she sat across from him and let him have it without filling the space with words, because she knew when to go quiet too. He lifted his head. His eyes were clear. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. Now, let's go handle your father. The 9 o'clock council meeting was held in a room on the 32nd floor of a building in central Seoul that the Han organization used for formal gatherings that needed to appear legitimate. Glass and steel, and a conference table long enough to seat 14 people, which it did. Han Jung-soo arrived at 8:55 and found that the seating arrangement was not what his assistant had prepared. The 2 council members who had received Naomi's documentation at 6:55 were seated at the far end of the table with a third colleague between them, and all 3 of them had the particular stillness of people who have already had a conversation this morning that changed the shape of what they came here to do. Min-jae arrived at 9 o'clock exactly. He came through the door with his coat on and his face arranged in the Han manner, controlled, present, nothing visible on the surface, and he crossed to his chair and sat down and looked at his father across the table. Han Jung-soo looked at his son. Something moved behind his eyes. An assessment. A recalculation. He had not expected Min-jae to know yet. That was visible in the recalculation, the slight adjustment of a plan encountering a variable it had not accounted for. You know, Han Jung-soo said. Not a question. Yes, Min-jae said. The room was very quiet. 12 people in it, and all of them aware that something was happening that was not the meeting they had prepared for. How? Min-jae looked at his father. It doesn't matter how. Han Jung-soo looked at the table. He was a man who had built things through patience and precision and the strategic application of pressure at the right moment. And he was looking at a moment where all 3 of those tools had been removed from him simultaneously, and he was doing the thing that men like him did in moments like that. He was still, completely still, assessing. What are you going to do? He said. Min-jae reached into his jacket and set 3 sheets of paper on the table. Not the full documentation, a summary, prepared by Webb at 4 in the morning, clear and specific and without excess language. He slid it across to the council member on his immediate right and said nothing. The paper moved around the table. Han Jung-soo did not look at it. He looked at his son. "I built this organization," he said. "I built it from something that was failing, and I turned it into what it is. Everything you have, everything you know how to do, came from what I built." "Yes," Min-jae said. "And you're going to use what I built against me." "I'm going to use what you built to do what it should have been doing from the beginning." Min-jae's voice was level. Not cold. She had expected cold, and it wasn't cold. It was something more difficult than cold. It was the voice of a person being honest with someone they love about something that cannot be undone. "You didn't build a crisis, Ba. You built a lie. And you built it around me and expected me not to see it, and I saw it." The word Ba. The Korean word that was not the formal address, but the other one. Naomi, watching from outside the glass wall where she had no seat at the table and had not requested one, saw it land on Han Jung-soo's face, saw what it cost the man, what it opened in him despite everything, and understood that this was the most brutal thing about the morning, more brutal than the documentation, more brutal than the council members with their recalibrated positions. The brutality was that Min-jae still loved his father and had used the word that said so, in the same breath as the word lie, in front of 12 people, and Han Jung-soo had to absorb both of those things at the same time. The Choi Alliance would have secured this organization for another generation, Han Jung-soo said, quieter now. The Choi Alliance would have ended this organization and started a Choi one, Min-jae said. You know that. You are too intelligent not to know that. Choi Byung-soo does not consolidate. He absorbs. In 10 years, there would be no Han organization. There would be Choi, and somewhere inside it, a subsidiary with our name on it. The alternative was collapse. The alternative was me. Min-jae looked at his father. I told you 9 years ago that I would build something inside this organization. I have built it. I have spent 9 years making myself indispensable in ways you could not remove without losing more than you gained, and you know that. And that is why the crisis had to be big enough to override it. He paused. You could have just talked to me. Han Jung-soo looked at his son for a long moment. The room did not breathe. You were in love with a girl who was going to take you away from this, he said. 17 years old and already gone. I could see it. I came back, Min-jae said. Every year, for 9 years. I came back and I built and I stayed, because this was mine and I take care of what is mine. His jaw moved. You didn't trust that. You should have. The council member at the far end cleared his throat, a small sound that was nevertheless the sound of the room remembering it had 12 people in it and a formal agenda. Han Jung-soo looked at the paper that had traveled around the table. He looked at it for the first time. He read it with the stillness of a man reading his own sentence, and when he set it down, his face had the quality of something that has been carrying enormous weight for a very long time and has just been permitted to put it down. What happens now? He said. To Min-jae, not to the council. You step back from operational control, formally, voluntarily, on the record. The council takes a transitional oversight role for 6 months and then transfers operational leadership to me. Min-jae looked at his father. You remain on the strategic board. Your name stays on the building. Your legacy stays intact, not because you deserve that, but because I am not going to spend my tenure destroying the thing I intend to rebuild. Han Jung-soo looked at his son. At the man his son had become, assembled from 9 years of building inside the machine he had been given, harder and more complex and more honest than the machine had been designed to produce. She is outside the glass wall, Han Jung-soo said. It was not a question. Yes. She put this together last night. She and her team, yes. Han Jung-soo looked at the glass wall, at Naomi Carter standing in the corridor in her charcoal suit with her hands at her sides and her face giving nothing away, looking back at him with the same directness she had deployed across his desk 9 years ago when she was 15 years old. She was formidable then, he said. I told you, Min-jae said. Han Jung-soo was quiet for a moment. Then he did something Naomi had not seen from him before and would not forget. He looked at the table in front of him, and he put both hands flat on it, and he breathed. And in the breathing, something in his face released. Not collapsed, not broken, but released. Like a structure that has been under load for so long that even the people inside it had forgotten what it felt like without the pressure. "All right," he said, to Min-jae, to the council, to the room. "All right, outside." The formal transition took 3 hours of paperwork and council process that Naomi did not attend. She sat in the corridor and worked through her email and drank coffee from a cart that appeared at 10:30 and thought about her mother and about what Danielle Carter would have made of this morning. She thought Danielle would have appreciated the documentation, would have said something dry about having the evidence ready before the meeting rather than after, would have said "girl" and shaken her head, and then probably cried a little because Danielle could hold two responses in her body at the same time without them canceling each other out. Minji came out of the council room at 12:15 and stood in the corridor and looked at her. "Done?" she said. "Done." He looked tired in the specific way of a morning that had taken more than a morning's worth. "My father signed the transfer documents, effective 30 days from today. And Seong-woo. The council will handle Seong-woo's situation separately. He's cooperating in exchange for a reduced consequence, which means what he sold and to whom is now fully documented. The rival syndicate's funding is being frozen through legal channels." He paused. "What my father built, I can dismantle. Now that I know what it is." She nodded. "How is he?" "Your father." Minji looked at the floor for a moment. "He ate lunch with my mother this afternoon. She called me at noon. She said he was very quiet." He looked up. "She also said to thank you. She wanted me to tell you directly." Naomi thought about a tea house in Bukchon and an envelope of 14 months of records and a woman who had spent 30 years watching and waiting to decide. "Tell her she's welcome," she said, "and tell her she did a hard thing." She did. They stood in the corridor together, and the building moved around them with its ordinary afternoon business, and the crisis was not over. Would not be over for months, probably, as the dismantling of Han Jung-soo's construction worked through its legal and organizational complexity. But the center of it had been reached and passed, and they were both still standing, and that was not nothing. "Come on," Naomi said. "Show me where you photograph." He took her to the river. Not the tourist sections of the Han River with their parks and bicycle paths, but a section further north where the city thinned out and the banks were plain and the water moved with the color the sky gave it. He had a camera with him, a real one, not his phone, a body she recognized from the photography account she had found in year 3, and he used it unselfconsciously, the way people do things they have been doing long enough that the self-consciousness burned off years ago. She watched him work. He was very still when he raised the camera. The same stillness she had first seen in a kitchen when he was 17, capturing light through a window. And then very deliberate, and then the stillness broke into the next thing he was looking at. They walked along the bank, and she told him about the things he had missed, about MIT and the first office, and the Series B and the magazine she had put in a recycling bin at an airport. She told him about Danielle, in the year 4 hospital, with the specificity of someone who has been over the memory enough times that they can hold it without flinching, which was not the same as it not hurting. He listened the way he had always listened, fully, without using the listening to prepare his next sentence. When she finished, he said, "I have photographs from the year she died. I didn't know at the time, but I was in Busan in March of that year for an organizational meeting, and I photographed the coastline. I still have them." She looked at him. "You were in Busan for 2 days. I didn't know you were still there. I thought you'd gone back to America already." He paused. "I almost looked. I had your mother's name. I could have checked the records, found an address." He looked at the water. "I didn't, because you told me not to come until I had the ground. I didn't have it yet." She thought about March of year 4, about sitting by a window in a house in Busan, having just come back from the hospital, watching the coastline in the gray morning. "You were in the same city," she said. "Yes." She absorbed that. The way you absorb things that cannot be changed and that hurt anyway. "I'm glad you waited," she said. "I wasn't ready yet either." He looked at her. Were you ever angry at me during the 9 years? She thought about it honestly. In year 2, for about 6 months in year 2, I was angry every time I put on the bracelet. She touched it. Still there, always there. Not at you exactly, at the whole shape of it, at the fact that loving someone at 15 could cost so much. Did it pass? Mostly. I redirected it into the company, which is probably why the company grew the way it did. She looked at him sideways. You're responsible for at least 30% of Carter Innovations' growth. He almost laughed. She had always liked the almost laugh, the thing that lived at the edge of it, controlled, and then briefly not. They walked until the light changed and the city came back up around them, and he took photographs of things she pointed at. A crane on a construction site, light on the water, a woman selling hotteok from a cart who had exactly the expression of a person at the end of a long day who has made peace with the length of it. He showed her the frames on the camera screen, and she looked at each one, and he looked at her looking at them. What do you see, he said, when you look? I see what you pay attention to, she said. You still photograph people trying to get to the next thing. You find them in the middle of getting there. She handed the camera back. That's what you were trying to do for 17 years. Get to the next thing. I got here, he said. You got here, she said. They found a restaurant that was the kind of quiet that meant it had been there long enough to stop needing to perform, and they sat across from each other at a table that was not a wooden table in a kitchen, but contained the memory of one. And they ate and talked for 2 hours about things that were not the organization, and not the documentation, and not Han Jung-soo. About the distributed systems paper she had read 3 times, and the Iceland photograph she had looked at in year 6 on his pseudonymous account, and the specific way Seoul felt different to her now than it had at 15. Does it feel like yours now? He said. She thought about it. Parts of it. The parts that were always mine, the academy, Bukchon, the kitchen. She looked at him. The garden. The plum tree has died, he said. It died in year 6. My mother had it replaced. The new one is smaller. Plum trees take a long time, she said. The new one will get there. He looked at her across the table. At the woman assembled from the girl he had known, more complex and harder and more herself than anyone had given her space to be at 15. He reached into his jacket pocket and set something on the table between them. The original pendant. His grandmother's. The first one. She looked at it. She reached into her own jacket and set the 2 she carried beside it. 3 pale green pendants on a restaurant table carved into plum blossoms, warm from being carried against 2 bodies for 9 years. I don't want to give it to you again, he said. I want to give it to you for the first time, properly. Without the Han estate in the background and without my father's architecture around us. He looked at her. I want to give it to you as a person who is choosing this freely and not because there is no alternative. She looked at the pendants. She thought about his grandmother, a woman she had never met, who had passed something along because she believed her grandson would find someone worth giving it to. She thought about what it meant that he had been right. I'm choosing this freely, she said. I know. Then give it to me. He picked up the original pendant and held it across the table between them. She put out her hand and he set it in her palm, and the weight of it was the same as it had always been. Almost nothing, impossibly heavy. She closed her fingers around all 3. What happens now, she said. Practically, with the organization, with the transition. 30 days of formal handover, 6 months of council oversight. Then I start doing what I've been building toward. He looked at the table. The legitimate subsidiaries expand. The criminal operations contract piece by piece, over time. It is not fast and it is not clean, and there will be people inside the organization who resist it. And I will have to manage that resistance with tools that are not the tools I would prefer to use. I know. Carter Innovations cannot be publicly associated with the Han organization during the transition. The legal exposure would... I have counsel working on a structure, she said, a firewall arrangement through a third party that gives me legitimate engagement with the Han subsidiaries without direct association. Webb has been drafting it since 4 a.m. She paused. 30 days is enough time to have it ready. He looked at her. You built the structure while you were building the council strategy. I build things simultaneously. It's more efficient. He was quiet for a moment. You are going to be the most complicated person I have ever attempted to be in a relationship with. Yes, she said. That's accurate? Good, he said. I have spent 9 years being the most complicated person in every room I was in. It will be a relief to have someone who matches it. She looked at him across the restaurant table and felt something settle in her chest that she recognized as the specific sensation of a thing that has been braced for a long time being allowed, carefully and with full awareness of the risk, to unbrace. It did not feel like victory. It felt more honest than victory, more like arriving somewhere after a very long walk and finding that the place was real, that it had existed the whole time, and that the walking was what had been required to be able to stand in it. I'm going back to Chicago next week, she said. There's a board meeting I can't miss and a contract delivery that has to happen in person. I know. And then I'm coming back to Seoul. I know, he said. I'll be here. You'll be here, she said. Not a question. I built 9 years of ground, he said. I'm not moving. She put the 3 pendants in her pocket and picked up her chopsticks and looked at the food that had been sitting in front of them and said, Eat something. You haven't eaten since yesterday. He picked up his chopsticks. You haven't either. I eat at my desk. It doesn't count. That is not healthy. I'm aware. They ate. The restaurant moved around them with its quiet, the other tables doing their own business, the kitchen making its sounds. Outside, Seoul was doing what cities do at the end of a long day, settling into its evening, rearranging itself for the next version of itself that would begin in the morning. Min-jae reached across the table at some point and took the bracelet gently between 2 fingers and looked at the metal charms, the circuit board, the binary notation, the small stylized antenna. And she let him look, and he set her hand back down without saying anything, because the bracelet said the thing already and had been saying it for 9 years and did not need translation. They stayed until the restaurant was nearly empty. Walking out, his hand found hers on the street. Not the gesture of someone making a point, just a hand finding another hand in the dark, the way hands do when they know the shape they're looking for. And she let it stay, and they walked along the Seoul street in the evening, and the city carried on around them in all its noise and necessity, and neither of them said anything for a while, which was its own kind of conversation, the kind that only existed between people who had learned how to be quiet together first. The jade pendants were warm in her pocket against her ribs. The bracelet sat on her wrist where it had always been. Above the city, the sky was doing something with the last of the light, the kind of thing that makes photographers go still, and people who have forgotten to look up miss entirely. And Min-jae stopped walking and raised his camera, and she stopped beside him and watched him find it, the precise angle, the exact quality of what the light was doing. And she thought about a boy at 17 in a kitchen with his phone raised toward a window, and the same quality of attention, the same absolute stillness, and understood that 9 years and everything they had cost had not changed the essential nature of the person she was standing next to. He lowered the camera and showed her the frame. She looked at it for a moment. That's the one, she said. Yes, he said. They kept walking. Behind them, the light changed and the city moved into its night, and the Han estate sat somewhere to the north with its new plum tree in the garden and its old stone paths and the bench at the back corner where 2 teenagers had once said true things in the cold and meant every word of them. And somewhere inside that house, Han Jung-soo sat at a dinner table with his wife and was very quiet. And somewhere across the city, Seong-woo Han was cooperating with a council process that had finally caught the thing he had built his entire life trying to outrun, and the rival syndicate was contracting as its funding disappeared, and all the machinery of 9 years was winding down into something that would take more years to fully settle, but that had found today its turning point. And on a street in Seoul, 2 people who had cost each other a great deal and given each other more walked in the evening with their hands together and their respective silences and the weight of 3 jade pendants between them that had traveled a long way to end up in the same pocket. Finally, after everything. It was not a perfect ending. It was the kind of ending that real things get, earned and complicated and still carrying the marks of what it had taken to arrive at it, which was the only kind worth having. They had promised they would find each other. This time, they kept it.